I am Dani Klein Modisett. I'm the founder and CEO of Laughter on Call. Very excited that you're with us today. And we have this fantastic guest. If you've never joined Laughter on Call before, I'll just tell you a little backstory. We actually launched in the healthcare space. Yes, I had been a comedian for 20 years and taught stand-up at UCLA for 10. But when my mother became depressed facing an Alzheimer's diagnosis, I could not make her laugh. So I had the idea to hire a professional, someone not her daughter, to do it. And it worked. And she started eating again and joining in her community and pretty much confirming everything I suspected about laughter and its power to create connection. What I learned, of course, is that even in loss of language, you can create connection. So, and then in COVID, excuse me, we were locked out from our senior communities because after that initial meeting with that comedian, that's when we launched Laughter on Call, and we were working with seniors and in communities all over the country. And then, of course, we were locked out during COVID, and I had this idea to live stream interactive comedy workshops, really just to get people connected. And we called it Lunchtime Laughter, Monday through Friday from 12 to 12:30. And very quickly, perfectly lucid people were showing up who felt alone and wanted the unique experience of shared laughter and comic relief. So that's how we ended up working with HR, who were desperate to bring people together. And actually, it was during that, very close to that time, that I met our guest today, the fabulous and talented Cindy Cornell. She's a Vistage Chair and executive coach. And when we met, she was actually a Yale School of Management executive coach for MBA and MBA executive students. She's also been a professor at NYU. And we are going to hear all about Cindy's background. So welcome, Cindy.
Thank you for having me, Dani.
You are, it's a delight to see you. You're in from Connecticut, am I right?
I am zooming in from Connecticut today. Yes.
Wonderful. Where I went to high school, everyone.
Indeed.
Yes. Westport, Connecticut. Okay, so Cindy, we are totally going to talk about the ripple effect. That's kind of the big thrust of today. And I think it's pretty interesting because we talk about, I talk a lot with laughter about laughter being contagious, right? And so I'm very interested in what's the distinction between kind of a contagion amongst a team and the ripple effect. And so that's what we're gonna address that. But I'd love to know, and for our people here today to know, some of your backstory. Did you always know you were going to be an executive coach? Tell us some of how you got here.
Sure. So no, when I was young, I didn't know I was going to be an executive coach because executive coaching really didn't exist in the same way that it exists today. So it really has, kind of coaching as a career, as a profession has really come into its own in the last 30 years or so, right? Of course, there's lots of precursors to it, but I'm thrilled to have gotten in. I don't want to say on the ground floor, but maybe on the first floor. I've been in the executive coaching space for about 20 years. And I did teach at NYU for about 12 years. But before that, I was actually in accounting and finance. So my undergraduate degree is in accounting from Penn State. I did do my MBA at NYU. I'm coming up on my 25th anniversary of my MBA reunion this year, and that was in marketing and finance. So I had a long corporate career before I actually, kind of stepped over into the coaching space. But you asked a question a minute ago, and I'll answer that quickly. The difference between the contagion, right, and the ripple effect, I'd say they're kind of looking at the same thing in two different ways. I look at the ripple effect as being something that you can observe and be intentional about, right, and the contagion is it actually happening, right, from person to person. So I have an intention as an executive coach, now Vistage Chair. Vistage is the largest CEO coaching organization in the world. It's in 40 countries, 45,000 members, really working with small and medium-sized businesses to help them get it right for their people, for themselves, for their families. and for
Yeah,
their communities. So
I
my
know.
excitement,
I speak for them as well, so we're
you
kind of in
do.
that Vistage family.
Yeah,
Uh,
so it's that's fun that we share that. But my reason for being excited about Vistage is that it's about the ripple effect. It's about, right, in our personal communities actually doing things that matter to people that we touch, kind of every day. And that's my intention is to, kind of have a positive impact.
Great. I'm wondering if you could be even a little more specific about like what the ripple effect is. I mean, and maybe where the theory was initially put forth.
I haven't done the provenance of the effect, right, all the way back to who came up with the idea for the first time, but we can visualize it, right? That drop hitting, kind of a body of water and the ripples going out. And they go out for a long time. And you don't necessarily know where they're going. I think the first time probably I really understood the ripple effect in business was when I was in a turnaround situation. And there were just a couple of us, there were three of us in the organization. The director of finance, myself, I was a manager of accounting and reporting, and the CEO. And I've learned, were the barometer for how well the business was doing. And if we were in a good mood, people thought things were going great. And if we were, kind of stressed or unhappy about something, people thought the sky was falling. So, right, that was the first time. And I was young, I was in my, kind of early mid 20s at that point, where I realized how powerful my mood was to others in a professional context. And I really learned, kind of as a leader, and it was more of an influential leader as opposed to a, kind of a hierarchical leader. I understood my responsibility as a leader in keeping people's morale up was to be aware of, kind of how I was showing up, because of the impact it had and how it informed people's focus.
Yeah, that's so interesting because we have experienced that a lot in the Alzheimer's space, right? So when people are, no longer have language, how you show up and the energy that you bring into the room really affects the person that you're a caregiver for, care
Mhm,
partner, because they actually become very, very sensitive
mhm,
emotionally and energetically. So it almost doesn't matter what you're saying. It's like, what energy are you bringing in to create a connection? So,
mhm. Absolutely. And for us, where we actually still have, because I've had experience in the Alzheimer's space as well, where we want to be really thoughtful about how we respond as opposed to react, because sometimes people don't do things that we might, kind of normally consider are, kind of appropriate. And you don't want to kind of pull back or respond in a negative way, because the whole purpose of visiting those that we love that are dealing with Alzheimer's is to try to reconnect with them. And you lose those glimpses of recognition if you actually kind of, get in the way of it by you know putting out negative energy, I guess, is the
yeah,
easiest.
yeah, yeah, about letting that affect you. I
Yeah.
wonder if you have any stories you can share about where laughter or where leadership introducing laughter really had a positive rippling effect, if you will.
uh I don't have a single example of it, but I just like, want to talk about, kind of culture, right?
Yeah, please.
Organizational culture. And you can use your power as a leader for good or for evil, right? And I would joke with my son when he was younger. He's now 6'5" and 18, and kind of full of his own ideas as one would be at that age. But when he was little, I would talk to him about choices, right? And you don't have good people and bad people. You have good choices and bad choices. And we watched a lot of Star Wars in our house. So it was, light side or dark side behavior. And you can make choices just like in Star Wars, right? Anakin, when he was little, made some light side choices. And then in the middle of his life, he made some dark side choices. And then at the end of his life, if you watch the whole thing, he made some light side choices again. So you can change your mind. but you want to be really intentional and understand the impact, right? Darth Vader certainly understood his impact and his influence and power. I think a lot of our leaders aren't so aware of their impact. And, I'll use a quick example. I coach a former employee of mine, and he had worked for me in a company as a manager level, and he had called me back, 5 years later, and he said, "You're never gonna believe it. I need to talk to you as a coach." It's like, "Okay, what's up?" And he told me, "I'm going back in." I was like, "Okay, that's really cool. This is, kind of friend Cindy, not coach Cindy first. I need to tell you something before we begin." And he was, "What?" Like, "You are now the intimidator, not the intimidatee." And he was kind of like, "What are you talking about?" And I reminded him that when we'd worked together, he was really anxious about any meeting he would ever have with a director, with anyone who was senior. And he was going in as a director level. He saw himself though as that same manager. He was stepping into those old spaces. And if I hadn't kind of done a pattern interrupt for him, he would have shown up with that level of anxiety about getting it right for these people, being judged,
Hmm.
pointing out you're now the person making judgments, and you now, based on how you show up and what you say, is going to influence how the younger people, right, the lower level people are going to see you. So that awareness of how do you show up in life, how do you show up in your conversations with your employees, with your peers, with your clients, right? That has a lot to do with whether you're going to build trust and whether there's going to be an environment of psychological safety, right? We've heard a lot talked about psychological safety, and the fact that Amy Edmondson of of Harvard, has written extensively on this. Where there's safety, right, and there's more engagement, 76% more engagement in
Right.
teams, 50% higher productivity, and 27% lower turnover. So knowing how you are showing up, right, and understanding the impact of that, and are you creating a safe environment, is going to actually have a ripple effect through their teams where they're showing others how to be by their own behavior, and that's going to influence, how they communicate with each other and how they innovate.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting that you're talking so much about self-awareness and how you show up because, when I taught stand-up at UCLA for 10 years, as I said, and the opening class, the first class, and this is something that I do even with my Vistage engagements, is that you have the person stand in front of the room
Hmm.
and not speak, and then the class shouts out adjectives about what they're getting just from the person walking in the room. And I used to say back in the day, but you can't be mean. You can't say anything Seth MacFarlane would say. But now, I don't know who you would say. There's a lot of people you would say. So nothing mean, right?
Hmm.
But it's so much information.
Hmm.
And for stand up, of course, that's how you kind of either undercut, you misdirect, give in what you're walking in the room with. And then, but for leaders, it's been really interesting for them to know like what their presence is. So, and how that affects how they communicate. So
Hmm.
exactly, you kind of can't, without self-awareness, you can't really know how you're landing, essentially, is what and the bridge that you have to cross to get people to understand what you're saying and to hear what you're saying.
Oh,
Because if right
totally.
away they, so anyway, I cut you off.
No, it's straight up all of that. And the other thing I just add in, the World Economic Forum does a great future of jobs report. I've been looking at it since at least 2021. 2025 just came out, and they have a skills analysis in there as well. And if you look at the skills, right, the future of jobs report, highest level skills, leadership and social influence is one of the top skills required for success, right?
Hmm.
And it actually had a 22% increase over the 2023 report, right, as being really important. So if you think about success in business, your ability to, kind of be a strong leader and have positive social influence, is pretty critical. Close behind that were resilience, flexibility, and agility, and then, as you might expect, AI and big data. So those were the skills, right? That group of skills, and AI and big data, we're all just trying to figure that out. So getting back into that space of psychological safety in the workplace, right? If you don't have psychological safety, people aren't going to bring out creative new ideas, and we
Oh,
need
for
to
sure.
innovate together in order to actually figure out how to work in new ways. So it's
Yeah.
critically important, and we haven't even gotten into talking about laughter yet.
Yes. Well, exactly. That's a very good setup, though, right? Although I have to say, secretly a little happy that AI comes in third. Yes, coming in third and coming in third, folks, because one thing that I've learned about is with all the technology and the growth and the boom and all of that, people skills are that much more important because
Mhm.
that's the one thing that AI can't deliver is empathy, compassion, humanity, right? And so it's not a surprise to me that this is what's really being valued now in leadership is your social skills. So
Well, it totally, and AI, right? Like, let's just, kind of take that apart. Artificial intelligence, right? The artificial part is the technology part. The intelligence part is the part that we bring. And
yeah,
it really is looking at that data, right? Which really is just data, right? And it's, kind of the computers are drawing some inferences and making some connections, but it's really up to us to understand situationally, and based on our knowledge, right? Does this make sense?
right.
And right, like, because it's just programmed, right? So we've known programs to get things wrong in the past, right? So we have to bring that intelligence, some of which is relational, and these human skills that we were just talking about.
Yes, exactly. And and then of course resilience. I mean, that's such a big reason why we're always talking about laughter because laughter, if you're able to laugh at something, that is a sign of resilience. Like we're
Mhm,
going to get to the other side. We're now laughing about this, which
mhm,
means we have the perspective to appreciate that it's not forever.
mhm,
We
mhm,
are going to get through this. So, yeah, I mean, laughter and all the different kinds of laughter. I mean, we talk a lot about affiliative humor, like that's our stock and trade, if you will. And that is pretty much what it sounds like, affiliation, right? To bring
mhm,
people together. Because you really don't move relationships along by being sarcastic or kind of putting people down or anything like that. It really is about how can we find our human, where we connect as humans and
mhm,
create, as you said, a space where we trust. Because that's really also one of the byproducts of laughter is that
mhm,
when I laugh with you and then I trust you because we laughed at the same thing, like we shared that
mhm.
nonverbal reaction to something. And so it's a really amazing tool for creating trust as well.
Oh,
So
totally. It
yeah.
also, for amusement, but
Oh, that.
increases our pain tolerance. Right? It reduces cortisol in our bodies, and in addition, it actually enhances oxytocin bonding and dopamine, which opens us up to learning and motivation. So all of those things, right, where we can find those spaces to laugh with each other, right? Because that's
Yeah.
super important, right? Like, if you're laughing at people, that's disassociative,
Yes.
and can be really damaging organizationally.
Yeah.
um and but yeah, the oxytocin and all of those really good things when we're with one another, kind of creates much stronger teams and better results, also,
Yeah.
right? Health results too, right? Happy people tend to have less heart disease. Go.
I know. But I do have a great story about that creativity and opening up creativity because I'd read the studies that say once you get people laughing, they're that
Mhm,
much more creative and contributing their ideas. So we
mhm,
did this wonderful event for Elfster, which already is a happy company. They
mhm,
have gift lists and it's wonderful. And so we met with them and maybe they're on because somebody's sending hearts. And we had this wonderful meeting with them. And then the final exercise was to write a jingle, a new jingle for Elster. And they broke it into groups. And we'd already had about 3 hours together where we were doing a lot of interactive and we laughed together and everybody was really connected. And it took them 2 minutes and 30 seconds. They were done. Each group was done. They had, and they sang their jingles, full commitment, something else we talked about, confidence and taking a choice. And they were so good. But what was, oh, yes, yay. Hi, Elizabeth. But what was so remarkable was the speed. It really confirmed the statistics, the speed with which they were able to do that because they'd had 3 hours laughing together. It was such a wonderful, wonderful example of that. All right, apparently we have, oh, this is good. We have a question here. How do you define flexibility and how do you teach it? Love it.
Flexibility. And what do we have any other guidance on what the question is? Because
No, they just really
flexibility, I
want
don't
to
know if
know.
they're talking about teaching
Flexibility is,
yoga or right.
yeah, I mean, flexibility is this is what I'm hoping happens. Uh-oh, this is what's happening. How do I
Mhm.
respond to what's happening?
Yeah, that I mean, I think it's really keeping your eye on the prize, right? I was coaching somebody earlier today and um we were talking about the fact that, kind of the door they thought they would be walking through didn't open. And that's okay because we're not the goal wasn't about that door. The goal is this longer term thing that's out in the future.
Hmm.
And they're gonna get there. They're just gonna get there by different means. And I joke sometimes, kind of there's a saying that people make plans and God laughs, right? This is where we get into kind of growth mindset, Carol Dweck's work around, right? Being open to ideas and learning, right? How can I? What help am I looking for? One of the things that we do in Vistage when we get into executive sessions and we're working in peer groups with one another. What help am I looking for from the group? We're really looking for, a broader perspective of ideas
Hmm.
towards that goal. I know you titled this Yes and,
Right.
right?
I was just going to talk
And
about that. Right.
a tool that I used when I taught coaching at NYU was using a dilemma model that said I'd like to blank, right? The thing you want to do, but there's that word that we don't like to use in improv, but blank, right? I don't really care so much about this, but this door is closed, right? What is that thing that you want to do? And let's really put our energy to that and get clear about how do we get there. And it might just look a little bit different. So being really clear about a goal helps with flexibility, I think, because it helps us to see that there's some different avenues to get there, right? If we wanted to have our next meeting in person, on a beach somewhere, right? But then there was an airline strike, we could still figure it out, right? We just wouldn't fly there. Um,
Mm,
right? So the destination is still there, the idea is still there, or is it really about the beach, or is it about that being together, right? Is there a different place where we can be together to accomplish whatever we want to do? So sometimes we get caught up in the details, and the the ultimate goal is really something that's much more profound than that. And if we're not all clear, especially if you're talking about a larger team, if you're not all clear about the goal, it's going to be hard for everybody to work together towards that. Hopefully that
yeah. I mean,
answers.
what makes the rebel in me wants to say, but what if you can't even get the ultimate goal and you have to be flexible? Like what and what it makes me think of is, the genesis of Laughter on Call was we're going to work with seniors and deal with Alzheimer's in person. That was, the moment. And COVID.
Yeah.
And literally, no, you're not going to do
Yeah.
that, by the way. You are not going to realize that mission. And it was only, and I don't know, I guess because I have people who work for me who are 30, and I knew that we were live streaming. Like I didn't actually know, but I knew that we were training comedians using a camera in the office live. So
Right.
I said, okay, well, can't we do this? Like everybody's going to be alone. We're like, I was told you're closing. So you're closing the business, but you have a camera, people are
Yeah.
home. Why don't we just see what happens if we start inviting people who are isolated? So I think that is, when that is the beauty of improv, right? Is like, okay, this is what I wanted to happen. And then there's what's really happening. And to not be so married to this one vision, it has to look like this, that you don't open your mind. I think that, and be willing to fail. Like,
Yeah.
also you could fail, and what does that mean to you? Like redefining what, have you failed if you tried? I know I suddenly sound like a Greek scholar, but that, because that could have just blown up too.
Yeah.
Um and so I think that, and just in response to the question, I feel like flexibility is being able to be with what is, and constantly asking yourself, okay, what else can this be? What else can this be?
Yeah. Well, you actually did have clarity about the goal, right? Because that's what propelled you to figuring out how to go online, right? Because the goal wasn't about in person. The goal was about laughing and connecting. And
Mhm.
you figured out, right? Like you maybe hadn't been so clear about that, right? And that's something that I do in coaching, right? Is really helping people to get clear. And why is this important to you? How long have you been thinking about this, right? When this thing is accomplished, how's the world going to be different, right? You knew all of that stuff in your head. You maybe just hadn't committed it to, kind of paper in a way that you were sharing it with people, but you had that vision. This is about, kind of drawing it out. And then the flexibility comes into that commitment to that vision, right? When you get really amped up about it and you understand, going back to the idea of ripple effect, if this thing happens, right? Here's how all of these lives are going to be made better as a result. It,
Mm.
it doesn't kind of matter what barrier comes up because you're more committed to the thing that you want to accomplish, right? And those ripple effects than you are to doing it that one way.
That's
And for the
that's super interesting, because I've been thinking about the ripple effect only from the standpoint of a leader in a corporation, and all of that, managers, leaders, people. But really, what you've just identified is the ripple effect as an impulse for entrepreneurship too. That it's not just, I'm gonna make this widget. It's, I'm gonna make this widget because of the effect that I want it to have. And
right.
I do remember in the beginning, somebody saying to me, "Oh, well, it's so nice that you'll be working with communities in LA, and that's nice that you're doing that for your mom." And I was like, "No, no, 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 much bigger." Like
Yeah.
I really had this sense, having seen the impact of laughter on someone in cognitive decline, and knowing that there's comedians that need work, and see
Yeah.
what their gifts could do. I was like, oh no, no, this is a ripple, ripple out. But I
Yeah.
obviously I wasn't using that terminology at the time. But when you put it that way, like, that really makes sense.
Yeah, and then there's just also, right, the effect of relationships, right? So you and I met through someone you went to college with.
Hmm.
And through that, you've introduced me to people and I've introduced you to people. And because we know and respect each other's work, so that's another piece where, right, when we surround ourselves with smart people that have things to value, and we kind of appreciate what they do and the energy they bring into the world, we share that. And
Right.
I have examples of conversations I've had from teaching where I had student or random people, I'll just say random people, say, "Oh, you're a coach. You sound a lot like my coach." And I was like, "Oh, wow, like who's your coach?" And it was somebody that I had taught. And one of the things that
Oh
was
wow.
important for me was not to have my students leave sounding like me, right? I wanted them to find their own authentic voice. And that was one of the reasons I did it. It wasn't for anyone who's ever been in academia. You don't teach because you get paid well, you teach because you love it. And I was teaching because I could reach more people, right? Helping more people, as my cocktail party conversation goes, get out of their own way, right? That's what our barriers to our success are most often ourselves, right? But to have those people, those students of mine who went on to be coaches affect thousands of other lives, right? Like I had a small part to play in that, and I'm happy for that role. And it's not about ego, it's about leaving the world better than I found it. So
Mhm. Mhm.
hopefully that adds a little.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm curious, again, just going back to laughter, it just in terms of opening people up, I remember, because laughter, sometimes people are afraid of laughter, right? They think, oh, I'm not gonna be taken seriously if I use
Mhm.
laughter, if I introduce laughter. But another great moment, another illuminating, like, oh yes, this is exactly what I'm talking about moment was I was working with these two investors and it was very serious. I was, doing the dog and pony, this is laughter on call, and this is why we matter, even though we're not making a profit. This was early on. And and then I was telling them about early Zoom days and
Mhm.
and how we did this one event. And I guess I can swear since it's my podcast here. And the woman came on, everybody was drinking and they were partying. And she was like, she came on late, she didn't know how to use Zoom, and she was like, what in the actual is this? And these two investor guys started laughing like you did, like they started laughing. They had been very dour and they started laughing. And then they said, oh, wow, it's so interesting. We can't get our millennials or we can't get our younger people into the office. This was, like
Mhm.
around COVID. And what should we do? And what do we do about the fact that there's no mentorship? And they ended up like revealing and sharing all of these other challenges that never would have come to the surface if we hadn't had that laughter moment at the
Mhm.
top. So I'm always interested in, in terms of coaching, do you introduce humor, or how do you kind of weave that in, or if you do at all?
Uh, Short answer is yes. Slightly more complicated graduate school answer is it depends. It needs to be situationally appropriate. Uh, it
Mm.
can, and I'll share it. When I was younger, I had a wicked streak of sarcasm, right? I was raised on Monty Python. So, sarcastic, kind of sharp humor was my go-to. And I realized over time, I actually had spent in an earlier part of my career 18 months in Tokyo, and my sarcasm, right? It was so much a part of my how I spoke and how I interacted, that my Japanese colleagues, who are like the least sarcastic culture in the world, right? Like
Mm.
they started like, lobbing sarcastic quips my direction, and I like was hearing them and they landed really hard, and I was like, wow, that's not as funny as I thought it was. And that experience for me actually, almost, right? I won't say that I don't actually, kind of lob a sarcastic quip here and there, these days, but it largely cured me of that, right? Because I saw it was more of a protective mechanism than it was a connecting mechanism, right? It keeps distance when
Yeah.
you're sarcastic. So you want to be really thoughtful about the type of sarcasm. You also want to be careful about situationally using, self-deprecating humor, right? Because women may overuse that, right, to our detriment. You want to be thoughtful about, right, kind of showcasing a vulnerability or a weakness to make it easier for other people to also then be comfortable showcasing a vulnerability or weakness where it's not going to be taken advantage of, but not such that, kind of it might undermine your ability to command respect, right?
Right.
Because
Well, I
that's
always say
something.
I talk about self-deprecation a lot, and also discourage women, right?
Mhm.
Using it, but I always say, you can use it to create a human connection,
Totally.
but never about the thing you're being hired to do,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, where we can be human, right? And where people can experience, and through Zoom or not, right? Because it took you and I years of talking before we actually met in person for a day. Um, you want to be seen, heard, and respected by people, right? And if we get back to the idea of corporate culture, right? If you aren't seen, heard, or respected, or if you are being seen and heard but maybe on the out group where you're being laughed at, not laughed with, right? Like that can be really disruptive to culture and really hurt teams.
Mhm.
And I've seen that, I've experienced that. It's not your highest and best use of your any of your leadership skills if that's something that you're allowing to happen in your organization, because you're really going to cannibalize your own results, right? The things that we need to succeed are, kind of perspective, collaboration, not yes menning, and kind of pushing things through, right? Because if you want to be the person at the back of the pack trying to catch up with everyone else, then maybe kind of keep doing that. But if you want to be kind of innovative on the cusp, trying to figure out what to do with all of these new technologies, trying to figure out what to do with a really dynamic and competitive marketplace, right? You need your people talking to each other and really kind of connecting in ways that they're comfortable sharing new ideas and not being laughed at.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you've ever had anybody come to you when the ripple effect has been negative and they're trying to swim, and what one does when we are kind of a victim of a ripple effect and how to break that.
Yeah, again, I'll say it depends, right? Sometimes there's some things you can do, depending on how bad it is, right? It's a lot of organizations that talk a lot about culture, I've learned, are talking a lot about it because they're not actually living it yet. It's still aspirational, so that's something to kind of be aware of if you're moving into a role, right? Asking questions that demonstrate that it exists, not that it's aspirational, right? Can you share with me some examples of how you're living out these elements of your culture in, kind of in your day to day? And you'll figure out if it's aspirational if they don't have any great examples, or, but
Oh,
so
right. So just to clarify, so if a
yeah.
company's mission is, we have a culture where we are committed to innovation and celebrating everybody's talent.
Yeah.
I don't know that that would
Ask
necessarily.
questions about that if you're interviewing,
Yeah.
right? To get more than one example. Right, and make
Okay.
sure it's happening, right? Like, don't just look at the corporate website and say, "Oh, these are the things that are happening," right? That, some corporate function is actually putting up. But if in the group that you're going to be living with day to day, right? Like, how does that show up in this group, right? Ask questions to make sure it actually it exists, right? Because, culture and finding a good fit, it's kind of like dating, right? You can actually look at an online dating profile and start to create that fantasy amazing relationship in your head, but that's a relationship you're having with the idea of something, not the actual people, right? So how do you want to be interacting with those people, right? What are some of even your hot spots, some of the things that might throw you off, right, where you wouldn't be at your very best? So you're really being thoughtful about kind of your own needs in a relationship and asking for those things. So I'd say before you go anywhere, get really clear about what you're looking for and look for evidence in that organization that it really exists. It's not just something that they're all working towards. But also, if you're in it, right, and it's, you're seeing symptoms of it, right, call it out. Wow, that came across a bit more harshly. Did you, I think you might have meant, right? Did you intend for that to have such a harsh impact? When you say it this way, right? This is what I'm hearing from you. Is that what you really meant, right? Sometimes when you call people out on their, I'll, join you. When you call them out on their shit, right? They're going to be like, oh, I can't get away with it with this person, right? And they'll back off a little bit. Sometimes you'll be in an organization where they really just don't care. And unfortunately, in our culture, bully culture does exist, right? And you have to make a choice about whether you want to be in that culture or whether you don't want to be in that culture, because not everyone is here for us to fix, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
you need to kind of really make sure that you're in an organization and a culture that that works for you and where you can actually do your best work. And going back to the idea of ripple effect, where you can have, you can use your gifts in ways that that makes sense. Yeah, not everybody can be. I just see the chats, right? Like, not everybody can be fixed. Not everybody wants to be fixed. I found bad behavior in business and in life is usually rooted in insecurity, right?
Yeah.
Past trauma, humiliation, or fear, right? And from that perspective, right, we can look at people with some empathy, right, and understand that, it doesn't excuse their behavior, but you can see them for humanness and let it go, right? Again, it's not yours to fix. I'm not going to carry that. That wasn't about me. That's their thing. And right, pick your, kind of whatever your spirituality, you might pray for them or whatever, wish them well, but they can have their life over there. We have boundaries for ourselves as well.
I mean, I think that's great unless they're undermining you with their defective character, so to speak. Like,
And if they are, right, get yourself the heck out of that situation, right? If they're undermining you, and if you can't actually, if you don't have the support around you to kind of deflect it or kind of amend it or adjust it, right? Like it's a losing game if you want to have a positive effect in the world, right? You might be able to do better work in other places. And one of the things I looked at, and I used to teach this at NYU, right? When I was teaching new coaches, right? Like one, right, you need to want to be coached, right? Not everybody can it is coachable, right, for different reasons. And I would also talk about the fact that there's nothing to fix, right? We are dealing with the healthy functioning aspects of that individual.
hmm,
And if they're not ready or willing to work on something, if they're not really committed to that I'd like to part of the goal, then it's not necessarily, kind of something worth, kind of pursuing. And if you expand that into a workplace culture, right, we should all be, and I very rarely use the should word. I say we don't should all over ourselves in coaching, but ideally we'd be working towards the same goal. And there's some environments where like the goal changes every 3 days, or we use information as power, right? Where the goal might change, but we're not sharing with everybody all the information they need to be successful, because if I control the information, then I'm more powerful, right? That's not actually going to help us innovate. Those things happen in business, and you have to make a decision about, can I call this out in a way that it can actually be rectified, right? Can we rebuild trust and kind of um, the workplace culture in such a way that we are working with one another together towards a common goal? Or, is that person over there pissed off that I got the job and they wanted it? And, maybe this is an opportunity for you to kind of say, this was a phenomenal learning experience. I'm going to ask really different questions the next time I go into my next opportunity. Uh,
yeah, it's sounding very Succession, withholding information, the TV show I'm referring to.
totally. Yeah.
Like withholding and playing that
Yeah.
and,
But
you
if
know,
again, if you look at that, right, why are they doing that? They're doing that for power, because if I shared this with you, I would have less power, right? Like I am fearful for my own status.
yeah.
And if that's their chief motivator, right, if they haven't figured out that we're better together and, we can go farther faster if we're actually working with one another, then, right, like that's something I'm really happy that you mentioned that. We often assume that other people are acting according to our values, right? Each one of us has a different set of values, right? Bringing it back to humor, right? There's lots of different comedic styles and
Mhm.
people laugh at many different things, right? Same with our values. Different people have different values that are the most important to them. And there's things that you might value, right, in terms of truth and transparency, maybe fairness, right? That other people don't necessarily value as highly as you do, right? And if you're reading their behaviors through your own set of values without really understanding theirs, well, they don't feel seen, heard, or respected.
Hmm.
And you don't have that connection. So you really have to kind of think about what's motivating those behaviors, right? And if you understand that, maybe you will find something that you can actually connect with them on that they would find funny, that can actually be the crack where the light gets in.
It's so interesting because like, how do you have time to do your work? Like, like so much of a work life is about reading the room,
Mhm.
and it's not about your actual like skill set. It's, well, it's part of the skill set.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. There's a chart that basically shows kind of your technical skill and your human skills, right? And when you are a new person on the scene, right? If this is technical skills and this is human skills, you need to be way up here, right? And have low human skills. But when you become more of a more it goes like this. You need to have much less technical skill, right? Like you need to have conversations with people about what they're doing, right? Looking at the big picture, but you're
Mhm.
not doing the thing, right? Like you're not kind of putting the pieces of the widget together or whatever, or doing the math, or I was kind of doing journal entries, adjusting journal entries as an accountant. Like a CFO is not doing that. A CEO is
Right.
not thinking about that. They're thinking about big picture. They're thinking about influence. They're thinking about, long-term implications of plan A versus plan B, and the systems thinking, right, that goes into those things are much more complex,
Mhm.
informed by the technical. But the job as a leader is about people, right?
Yeah.
It's, getting greater results than you could on your own through, an effective work, kind of effective communication and direction of a group of people.
Yeah, and I feel like that's where listening comes in. Like that, it's much more important. And we talk about that a lot with laughter and comedy, whether it's stand up or
Mhm,
improv. Stand up, you really have to always be listening to the
mhm,
audience. You have to be present, and they're the other person in the scene, if you will. And
mhm.
and with improv, it's totally moment to moment listening. And it's just so fascinating to me. It has been over these like 25 years that it doesn't really, we're human, as long as there's human beings, all of these comedy tools of active listening and letting go of the moment before and knowing your audience, and being able to, I think I said, read the room, right? It's all relevant. It's all, and really important, I guess, except, at even at the most entry level job, when you're just number crunching, it's you and your skill, right? But as you develop, as you just said, like you have to be developing these human being skills because
Yeah.
the demands
Well,
are going
let
to
me
be
actually
daily.
just address that too, because it's not just number crunching, right? At that level, and this is where we are having so many challenges with a multi-generational workforce right now. Um, there are, right, like those people want to be seen, heard, and respected too, and they have had a really different life than I'm Gen X, right? I used to play Atari on a console, and we had the TV. We would watch the same TV channel because we didn't want to lose the space on the couch, right? Because if I moved, my brother was going to take the good spot. If I could get the channel I wanted, but I want, they've always been able to kind of get technology on demand and watch whatever they wanted, and kind of the way they interact even with each other is really different. So there's a respect for their values and their communication styles that we need to be aware of. And they need to feel and understand that there's a role that they play that's part of something bigger. And also, right, like with the gaming industry, right, like you move from like being the person that just won the day in the game to now being a minion in a job, right? So there's a disconnect between their
Hmm.
experience and, right, so we have to kind of help them to understand what is their role and how are they important without this thing, and then the context, right? I'm a big person, a big fan of context. I need to see where we're going and understand how it fits in. If somebody asks me, take you back to mid-career, if somebody came and asked me for a financial report, sure, I can give you that. What questions are you trying to answer by looking at that report?
Hmm.
Because I can give you what you just asked for and all of these, here's the rows and here's the columns, and to create this report in this form, it's probably going to take me 2 days. and I'm not going to be able to do the other things that I told you I was going to do. What do you
Mhm.
want? What are you looking for? Oh, I want to answer this, this, and this. I have this report on the shelf that will give you 90% of that. Do you
Mm.
want this right now? Or do you want this other thing? That's, kind of a piece of, right, human skills, right, where it's not just the numbers, that, will help you to go farther if you understand why you're doing the things you're doing and how it fits into the bigger and what's next.
Yeah. It seems also though it's about having the courage to ask the questions,
Hmm.
right? And when you're new, you don't want to, you don't want to come across like you don't know what you're doing. So you may not ask the right questions that would
If
help.
you're new, though, right, like take that ball and run with it, right? You're only new for this much time. If
Mm.
you don't ask the questions when you're new, and this goes for, kind of gray-haired people too, going into a new job, you can't possibly know all of the things, right? You might have known the things in the last company you were in, but this is a whole different group of people and a
Mhm.
whole different system. And maybe you're putting together, prior skills that you were expert at in a new way in this new place, right? You can't possibly know. So if you don't ask the questions when you're new, right? Like yeah, it does get really awkward later on if you're asking the questions and you've been there for 2 years. So I love that you brought the C word, courage up, right? So as if we take it back to leadership, right? Keeping it light and making it easy for you to, kind of be the person that people are asking questions to, and
Mm.
encouraging that collaboration and, people having fun with each other. That the issues that you brought up a little while ago, right? Where people had some questions and they had some challenges and concerns, they didn't bring them up until there was a pattern interrupt where everybody laughed together, right?
Mm. Mhm.
So
Right.
that, kind of selectively bringing in those, not mandatory fun. I'm not a fan of mandatory fun, right?
Mhm.
But making those, kind of those, kind of places like let's all go bowling, right? And everyone, look at your funny bowling shoes. But let's make it like in the course of the workplace, right? Because then when they get to you and laughter on call and you're doing something, it's not so awkward, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Because they're already they already like each other, right? And they're
Mhm.
excited to have those things, right? So you have to have the fun laughter stuff in the midst of it, um,
Hopefully,
every
that's
day, not just, kind of, once a month. Look at the fun thing we did last month, or,
oh, totally.
here's our monthly, here's our monthly webinar, and here's our question of the day, and everybody put your answer in chat.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
definitely
not
agree.
sure that that brings people closer together.
Yes. Okay, we have a question. Are there any issues you're seeing now that are new?
Issues around laughter culture. I think it's easier today than it's ever been for people to pick sides
Oh.
and to not actually try to find common ground with people. I think this has
Mm.
always been an opportunity, but um, I think we've, and I don't know if I'm just more sensitive to it right now, but I think we're really judgmental about folks. We make really quick decisions about what the differences are. And that's in large part because of the media, right? The media knows that when it puts negative information in front of us, our brains go into high alert, right? Right. Danger, danger, Will Robinson, for those people that can know that reference. Something's going to happen, right? Like I need to be on alert. And we aren't necessarily looking for those things that make us, kind of human together, right? We're not looking for those points of intersection because frankly, we all have more in common than we don't. And I'm, thinking of an example. Some years ago, I worked in a supply organization, and I was in finance, and it was really interesting because I was pulled in by the operating teams, right? Procurement, operations, logistics, to a lot of conversations that finance people hadn't historically been brought into. They brought me into those conversations because I helped them to understand when they were in violent agreement with one another.
Uh,
They were saying the same thing using different language. And
mm.
when I could help them to see that they were actually all kind of trying to do the same thing. They actually did have common values. They were just expressing them differently. And I then flipped it and said, hey, so here's really what we need. If you're saying this and you're saying this and it's the same thing, let me actually throw out a couple of challenging questions that I expect to get from the senior executive team, right? Because we now have to idiot proof this really good idea for them, right? We have to help them proactively, address their concerns so that they actually agree with this thing we're going to do together. But that was a process of really kind of showing people what they had in common and kind of interrupting the kind of the side taking. So
Yeah,
taking is not new, it's just really really prevalent right now in our world.
yeah, and I think way harder to find there, because people are so passionate about what they do believe
Mm,
politically that to say, oh, but we're all just,
mhm.
humans. It's really, I was just talking about this, about like being in the middle, you piss everyone off now. Like if, you're not,
I'm good with that, right? Like we can talk about politics or we can talk about business. It's us being human, right? Somebody posted something the other day, and I was like, "Wow, that's really interesting." I don't take my news through memes, though. Can you share with me an article that supports these, percentage? It was percentages around tariffs, and it was really interesting because I then read the article that the person that posted it didn't actually read, and I was like, "Wow, thank you so much for sharing this. This actually supports what I was sharing with you, right? Like it's zero tariffs to this point, and then it's 246% tariffs. But that was for this reason, right? Like where they were protecting their own industry. But you get to import this much before that tariff even kicks in, so it's effectively zero. Um, and
right.
that,
Well, I think
you
the
know,
key thing is not to go down the tariff rabbit hole
yeah,
of all of it, is what you just said, is asking questions.
yeah. What's the
Like
fact?
we
Share with
have,
me what you
right,
got.
we have to ask questions. We have to have the courage to ask questions
Yeah,
and the courage to listen.
yeah,
That's a tall order right now. Like
yeah.
not
And
everybody's up for that.
the other thing, I'd say I have somebody who, if I post something or whatnot, like I almost guarantee they're going to come in and here's my point of view. Every single time they share their point of view, I say thank you.
mm,
Right? That is their point of view. Thank you for sharing that. Here's where I totally agree with you.
yeah,
Right? And then here's where I see it a little bit differently. Here's where I see the risk, right?
yeah, yeah,
Because that actually it focuses on the thing we have in common. And the reason that they're even posting on something or that we're engaged is because we have a relationship, right? We care about each other because we have this thing that we experienced together um 45 years ago, maybe.
yeah. I mean,
But we care about it.
again, it's so wonderful because you're talking about yes you
Totally,
know,
all day
and
long.
yes we always say it's not just about the words yes and. It's
Mhm.
really what you're saying is yes, I hear you.
Yeah.
Yes, I
Yeah.
hear you. And have you considered this? Or, and what I'm thinking is, and so it's like this yes and way of life. So I think it's wonderful. We're out of time. I was just wondering, first of all, thank you so much, Cindy,
Oh,
for your
pleasure.
wisdom and your conversation. And thank you to everyone for showing up and listening and engaging. And if you want to know more about bringing laughter and connection to your culture, please, you can find me at laughteroncall.com. And so, Cindy, just one moment, if you can, of where laughter changed your point of view, or something made you laugh and it brightened you. Some moment of laughter in your life.
I'm just there's so many moments of laughter, but the things that are really the laughter that is most precious is the belly laughter when you are laughing so hard that you cry. And oftentimes that is when you've made the time and space, right? We're really busy with our stuff, right? That belly laughing comes with dear, close friends and family members that we see very rarely. And opening yourself up to those types of experiences with people and making sure that you're prioritizing those relationships reminds us of how much we do all have in common, and that we do all, kind of love each other and see each other. So I just say that, just I'm wistful now thinking about some of those moments, but it's really the who you're with and allowing yourself the space to be with those people, because you're going to be a better person if you actually take care of yourself and your people.
Well, I love that. I can't top that. And it made me a little wistful too. So thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming, everyone. And we will see you next month for sure.
Thank you again. Have a super day.